In the previous episode, we analyzed the rise of the Uyghur Empire and its impact on East Asian and Turkic history. Similar to the two Göktürk empires, the Uyghur Khaganate fell in 840 CE after nearly a century of domination over the steppe peoples of Mongolia and beyond. But having helped overthrow the Göktürks 100 years earlier, the Uyghurs were now the victims of an invasion themselves, this time led by the Kyrgyz. This tribe was one of the oldest ancient Turkic entities we know of. Originally residing near the Yenisei River, they moved to Lake Baikal and later resettled in the Sayan Mountains near the Altai, birthplace of the Göktürks. While the Uyghurs had distanced themselves from Turkic traditions and religion, the Kyrgyz reverted to the customs of the Göktürks. But the Khaganate that the Kyrgyz established was unlike those of the Göktürks and Uyghurs. The Kyrgyz never settled in cities, nor did they cultivate an extensive bureaucracy. Indeed, the Kyrgyz remained nomadic to the end. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you won't miss any updates. With that being said, let's dive into the history of the Kyrgyz, their origins and culture, and the implications of their rule for Turkic and East Asian history alike.
They became rulers.
Ohne sie findet man keine wahre Freiheit.
The origins of the Kyrgyz people can be traced back to at least the 3rd century BCE, when they were still residing on the Yenisei River that flows from Siberia to the Altai Mountains. While the exact meaning of the term Kyrgyz is still being debated, it seems plausible that the name derives from the Turkish word Kırk, which means 40. As the is a suffix, Kyrgyz would mean the 40, possibly 40 tribes that someday bonded together and formed a larger entity. The epic tale of Manas, a Kyrgyz folk hero who managed to unite 40 tribes under his banner, might also stem from this association. Other propositions for the meaning of Kyrgyz include imperishable, inextinguishable, immortal, unconquerable, or unbeatable. Tang Chinese sources describe the Kyrgyz as large with red hair, white faces, and green or blue eyes, and similar descriptions can be found in Tibetan and Islamic sources. Because of this, a number of scholars have been tempted to see the early Kyrgyz as a non-Turkic people, or an ethnically mixed people with a large non-Turkic component. Many scholars have supported this idea after identifying what they believe to be examples of non-Turkic, particularly Samoyed, words among the Kyrgyz words preserved in Chinese sources. However, the link between language and race is highly ambiguous. The physical appearance of the Kyrgyz cannot be taken as an indication that they were not a Turkic people, nor can the lexical appearance of a few possibly non-Turkic words, whose presence in the Kyrgyz language can be explained by the common practice of linguistic borrowing. The Kyrgyz inscriptions of the Yenisei are in fact written in a completely Turkic language, and Tang Chinese sources clearly state that the written and spoken language of the Kyrgyz of the time was identical to that of the Turkic Uyghurs. Most of the Kyrgyz words preserved in Chinese sources are Turkic. There is no reason to assume a non-Turkic origin for the Kyrgyz, as Professor Michael R. Dromp, an avid researcher of Turkic culture of the 6th to the 9th centuries, has argued. Kyrgyz culture was predominantly nomadic, with a strong emphasis on pastoralism and animal husbandry. They primarily raised horses, sheep, and cattle, moving with their herds in search of fresh pasture land. The Kyrgyz were skilled horsemen and developed a highly mobile and efficient military force, which was crucial for their success in the region. Their society was organized around clans and tribes, with a hierarchical structure based on family and tribal ties. In that regard, the Kyrgyz way of life seems indistinguishable from that of all other Turkic and Mongolic peoples of antiquity. But over time, the Kyrgyz came into extensive contact with their Turkic kin and became part of the TL Confederation. Avid viewers of our channel will recognize this name, as it were the TL who several times revolted against the Rouran Khaganate of Anagui, but were then defeated and subjugated by their own Turkic relative Bumin of the Ashina tribe. When Bumin then stormed into battle and defeated the Rouran twice, as a consequence overthrowing Anagui and proclaiming his own Göktürk empire, he did so with the help of the Tiela Turks. However, it seems that the Kyrgyz had not been part of this alliance anymore. because between 554 and 560 CE, Bumin's son and successor Mukhan was preoccupied with defeating and subjugating the Kyrgyz near Lake Baikal. This had not been a revolt of the Kyrgyz, but a defensive war to prohibit Mukhan from integrating them into his empire. In the end, the Gokturks were victorious. We can conclude from the ancient sources, most of which were written in Chinese, that the Kyrgyz by the 6th century, during late antiquity, had become independent from the Tiel. In a similar vein, the Dokuz Oghuz, among them the Uyghur tribe, had also left the Tiel. But unlike the Uyghurs, the Kyrgyz were not interested in conquering the Gokturk Empire, at least for the time being. During the Second Gokturk Empire of Kutluk Ilturish Kagan, the Kyrgyz established an alliance with the Karluks, another Turkic confederation to the west of Mongolia. By that time, in the late 7th century, the Kyrgyz had ostensibly moved to the Sayan Mountains, near the Altai Mountains. As the Gokturks had been resettled by the Chinese after the fall of their first empire, they now wanted to return to their home and re-establish their rule over the region. Tonyukuk, general of the Gokturks, took both Kultagin and Bilge Khan, the future emperor, and defeated an army of 80,000 Kyrgyz warriors near the Sayan Mountains. Once again, the Kyrgyz had lost independence. When the Uyghurs took over the Khaganate, the Kyrgyz remained mere vassals of other Turkic tribes. But then, in 840 CE, the time had come for the Kyrgyz to finally break once and for all. In 839, a minister named Kurabir seized the throne of the Uyghur Empire with the help of 20,000 Shatuo. The Shatuo were Turkic peoples influenced by Chinese politics and culture. In the same year, there was a famine and an epidemic, with a particularly severe winter that killed much of the livestock the Uyghur economy was based on. Then, an Uyghur minister called Kutlug Bagha, rival of Kurabir, fled to the Kyrgyz and invited them to invade from the north. With a large army, they successfully sacked the Uyghur capital Ordu Balik, apparently razing it to the ground. The Kyrgyz captured the Uyghur Kagan, Kurabir, and promptly beheaded him. They went on to destroy other cities throughout the Uyghur Empire, burning them to the ground. The Uyghurs fled in two groups. A group consisting of 30,000 people, led by the Uyghur aristocrat Ormizd, sought refuge in Tang territory, but the Chinese emperor ordered the borders to be closed, thus prohibiting entry. The other group, 100,000 strong and led by Oge, the new and last Khagan of the Uyghur Empire, also fled to Tang territory and demanded a city to resettle in. As the Chinese emperor saw himself confronted by two groups of Turkic refugees, but with one being larger in size, he decided to grant Ormizd and his people asylum. In return, he used Ormizd's warriors to defeat the army of Oge. Interestingly, the Kyrgyz and Tang dynasty together launched a war between 840 and 848 against the remaining Uyghurs, using their claimed familial ties as justification for an alliance. Indeed, the Kyrgyz rulers claimed descent from a Chinese general called Li Ling, grandson of the famous Han Dynasty general Li Guang. The story goes that Li Ling was captured by the Xiongnu and defected in the 1st century BCE to the Huns. Since the Tang imperial Li family also claimed descent from Li Guang, the Kyrgyz Khagan was therefore recognized as a member of the Tang imperial family. Emperor Zhongzong of the Tang had even said to them the following: "Your nation and ours are of the same ancestral clan. You are not like other foreigners." In any case, with the Uyghur dynasty gone, the Kyrgyz received full control over Mongolia and the surrounding regions, including Lake Baikal, parts of Manchuria, and the Altai and Sayan Mountains. The Kyrgyz did not, however, rule over the Tarim Basin, as other refugees from the Uyghur Empire resettled there and founded new kingdoms, which we mentioned in the previous episode. But rather than replace the Uyghurs as the lords of Mongolia, the Kyrgyz shorty thereafter continued to live in their traditional homeland, as they had for centuries. Since the Kyrgyz never built any structures, either in physical form by building temples and places of residence, or by manifesting a bureaucratic structure, no historical source explains the rule of law in the Kyrgyz territory, only some cultural customs regarding tribal affiliations, marriages, and so on. Can we then really speak of a Khaganate if there was no real empire to begin with? The Kyrgyz Khaganate is a compelling topic of discussion in the field of Central Asian history. Although it is known for its short-lived nature, the question of whether this state was a real empire has been debated by scholars for years. We certainly know that their political entity had earned the title Kyrgyz El, as mentioned in the Orkhon inscriptions. On numerous websites online, this has been translated to Kyrgyz state. But El in Turkic does not necessarily mean state, but simply land. Thus, the Kyrgyz El was the land of the Kyrgyz, the region that they inhabited. The Gokturks did not recognize any imperial condition regarding the Kyrgyz, but merely that they used to be politically independent. Used to be because, as we have seen, they were later subjugated by the Gokturks. But first things first, the earliest known Kyrgyz leader was Bars Bek. This man ruled the Kyrgyz as supreme ruler from 693 to 711 CE, and even carried the title of Kagan, a title reserved for those who ruled over the sacred forest capital of the steppe, Otuken. During Bars Bek's reign, it was Kapgan who ruled the Gokturk Empire from Otuken. As such, Bars Bek was hostile to his government. However, the Kyrgyz ruler was soon pacified when he married a daughter of the late Ilturish, a woman whose name is not known to us. Kapgan, her uncle, then bestowed upon Bars Bek the title of Lesser Kagan, who was to rule over both the Kyrgyz and the Az tribes. We will return to the Turkic Az in another video. For the time being, Bars Bek remained loyal to Kapgan. But as we have seen, the triple alliance of the Kyrgyz with the Karluks and the Chinese against the Gokturks proved futile. After a 10-day trek through the snowy steppes, Tonyukuk's armies reached the Kyrgyz camp, raiding it overnight and killing Bars Bek in the process. Once again, the Kyrgyz became subjects of the Gokturks, and even after the fall of the Gokturk Khaganate, they did not regain their independence due to Uyghur conquest. This only changed after the Kyrgyz raided the Uyghurs' capital, Ordu Balik. Contrary to popular belief, however, the Kyrgyz did not go establish a new Turkic empire, as they were either unable or unwilling to effectively consolidate and maintain control over the region. Instead, they returned to the Sayan Mountains and presumably remained there for some time. It is true that the Kyrgyz people had an influence over other parts of Mongolia, but not in the same way as other Turkic people. Two pieces of evidence support this assertion. First, the Khitan became independent after the fall of the Uyghurs, which implies that the Kyrgyz did not control eastern Mongolia. Second, there are very few accounts of Kyrgyz-Chinese relations, which is odd considering that the Chinese wrote extensively about their relations with the Gokturks and Uyghurs. This leads to the conclusion that the frontier between the steppe and the sedentary world was not under the control of the Kyrgyz. Therefore, the map you are looking at is, quite frankly, rubbish. It can be seen as part of a certain online encyclopedia and leads interested and curious readers of Turkic history to believe that the Kyrgyz people ruled over vast areas and were as powerful as the Uyghurs or even the Gokturk. Must we then argue that the Kyrgyz were not a dominant group in the region at that time? No, because these claims are also erroneous. The Kyrgyz did assert their influence over the region from time to time as they ruled over the Altai-Sayan Mountains, which stretch between present-day Kazakhstan and Mongolia, and frequently raided the lands to the east of their domain. However, the Kyrgyz did not rule the Tarim Basin, or even Bactria, as the map shown earlier suggests. Instead, these regions were ruled by other states, namely the new Uyghur kingdoms, as well as by the Turkic Kimek and Karakhanids. Kyrgyz influence was nevertheless an obstacle for a certain Temujin in his quest to become the great Khan of the steppe. After gathering and uniting the Turkic and Mongolic tribes in the east, he subjugated the Kyrgyz in 1206 and incorporated them into his new Mongol empire. This led to the rise of Turkic troops within the Mongols, as a large portion of the warriors under Genghis Khan's command were actually Turks. This speaks volumes about the lasting impact of the Kyrgyz people in this part of the world, as they remained an integral pillar of the Eastern Eurasian steppe belt. Their connection to the TL Confederation and their influence on the Karluks helped shape the history of East Asia and the formation of the Turkic and Mongol empires. The Karluk-Kyrgyz alliance with the Uyghurs against the Gokturks led to the dissolution of the Gokturk state, to the rise of the Manichaean Uyghurs, and the subsequent migration of many Turkic tribes away from East Asia to the west. The impact of this alliance cannot be overstated. In our evaluation, we must emphasize that the Kyrgyz never achieved imperial status like their predecessors. They did not leave behind any significant cultural or architectural achievements, but their way of life and their impact on the larger narrative of Turkic history should not be overlooked. Unlike the Uyghurs, the Kyrgyz did not settle in cities, nor were they inspired by foreign cultures or religions. And unlike the Gokturks and Hunnik Xiongnu, the Kyrgyz never united Turkic or Mongolic tribes under their own banner. Instead, the Kyrgyz remained true to the ways of their ancestors, remaining firm believers of Tengrism, adhering to the ancient Turkic traditions, and even reverting from the Uyghur script back to the Gokturk script, with some minor modifications in style. These people became known as the Yenisei Kyrgyz, having been born on the Yenisei River. For more than 2,000 years, their culture remained intact, and while the origins of the modern Kyrgyz people have long been debated, they are certainly linked by heritage to the ancient Kyrgyz of the Sayan Mountains. Perhaps this is the reason why, of all independent Turkic states, Kyrgyzstan is the one most deeply connected to ancient Turkic culture. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support us on Patreon. You can also become a member of our channel right here on YouTube. See you next time.